think I'm probably going to give a slightly different perspective that I hope is going to contribute. I'm going to talk about something that the organisation I work for, that I co-founded, which is a non-profit environmental movement called Green Thing, we call creativity versus climate change. And namely, that's the art of using great creativity to encourage behaviour change and to inspire green action. And I'll explain the thinking behind this and why I think that creativity is such a critical ingredient in future sustainability. This is what we do at Green Thing. Effectively, we think about our role as to do our best to provide an inspiration feed, if you like, of creative ideas and products and campaigns that can turn green living from something people feel they ought to do to something they actually want to do. Because it struck us very early on that there was a bit of it didn't really make sense to us why people would queue round the block for the latest iPhone, but they couldn't be bothered to switch a light off when they left the room. It's clearly not about the effort involved, how difficult that is to do. It's that one thing lives in the part of the brain that's about pleasure and leisure and fulfillment, and the other lives in the part of the brain that's about admin and chores and to-do lists, where it's something perhaps that we'll get round to later. So I think before I go on, I was going to let Green Thing himself give himself an introduction and explain a little bit about our approach to this. So I'll talk more after that.
People say to me, Green Thing, how hard is it to do your green things? And I always say, when you care, nothing's hard. When a nice looking girl says to you, hey, I'll give you a kiss if you drive me to college, you say, that would be nice, but I'm walking the walk. And when Michael O'Leary and Steve Jobs try to tempt you with their cheap flights and their shiny new gadgets, just say, you know what, Mike, I'd rather stay grounded. And Steve, I'm really happy to stick with what I've got. It's not that hard. How hard is it to all consume things like those leftovers in the fridge? How hard is it to use less central heating and more human heat? You know, and when things don't need to be on, how hard is it to plug out? But there's one green thing I find hard. I love steak. Steak with onions, steak with pepper sauce. But I also love my gorgeous vegetarian girlfriend. So for her, I go easy on the meat. So how hard is it to do these green things? Well, if you don't want your self-esteem to look like this, or your world to look like this, then it's pretty easy.
That's my favourite bit right here, actually. It's like a Pixar moment. So I think the point about this philosophy of creativity is that Green Thing believes great creativity is an astonishingly, absurdly, rationally, irrationally powerful force. It can do many things. It can spread tolerance. It can champion freedom. It can make war seem like tragedy or farce. Great creativity can be a meme maker that puts slogans on our t-shirts and phrases on our lips. It can make our engineering a symbol of modernity and progress and make our buildings be symbols of that. It can make technology, turn technology into insanely desirable tools for self-expression. And I think great creativity has the power to do something very special, to take an issue and to compress it, to sharpen it, and to make it connect with people and make them actually want to act. And I think nuclear disarmament's an interesting example where you have quite a complex global issue that a piece of graphic design helped, I think, by crystallizing this issue as a symbol that people could wear as a badge and march under as a banner. And the point that this all leads me to is that there's a problem, that great creativity is a tremendously powerful force, but at the moment, the majority of that force is being used to the wrong ends. The engine of creativity is being used every day to create an unsustainable society. The things that we eat, the things we buy, the way we get around, the energy we use, the stuff we throw away, as Hilary said. And I think it's a great shame because this is a tremendously powerful force in our lives. And all of the R&D investment, the innovation, the design, the communications is being used to the wrong ends. And the counterforce, with all great well-meaning intent, is, I think, a little bit weak by comparison. It's either seen as too activist, or too scary, or too preachy, or simply too complicated. And as a result, we don't think it's really a fair fight. from a citizen and individual's point of view, it actually feels like a rather stark binary choice, that on the one hand you're being seduced by these sort of temples of cutting-edge consumerism and all the lifestyle benefits that that brings, like the Apple store on Fifth Avenue. On the other hand, you're told, or you feel like you're being told to live in a cave with a candle. And that feels like the choice, I think, for a lot of people, that they're asked to give up everything that they value, the things that really matter to them, and that somehow sustainability is a life with less, a life without. I think it's a very dangerous way to frame the issue, because I think if you give people that choice, they are only going to do one thing most of the time. So for me, I think with what we're trying to do with Green Thing, and I think the reason it's perhaps useful in this context is what it exemplifies, is how can you use creativity to tell the other side of that story. And to illustrate, I'll give you an example of transportation. So one of the things that we encourage is people to walk more and drive less. Now, if you think about the creativity that goes into the automotive industry, a car, from a design point of view, is a really beautifully designed symbol of fashionability and status and self-expression and identity. It's very much, always been sold not just as a method from getting from A to B, but how you look when you're in the car and who you're seen with and so on. Music is a very, very important sort of creative force and spell that's used to make us feel that cars have an important place in our lives. Drive time radio is an actual musical category invented for barreling down Route 66 or the M6 in our case. And music is very, very powerful, and it's something that we associate with the thrill of driving. The same thing with the idea of speed. There's a kind of spell of speed which is cast, where if you're successful in modern life, you must be very busy. And if you're busy, you have to get places very, very fast, which means, of course, you need a machine that can do that for you and go from 0 to 60 in 5 seconds or whatever it is. And finally, there's a mythology almost about a sense of freedom and personal adventure that you get from driving, and there's lots of ways that this story is told. And my point is, this is a powerful narrative, and this is well told, this story again and again, and there's lots of resources that go behind it. So, as an example, how might one use creativity to think about putting a counterforce in the opposite direction? Well, one of the things, as one example that we like, is Mbt Shoes, where it's a training shoe. It does the job that training shoes do in terms of it says something about who you are and style and fashionability. But it also happens to be a shoe that's designed to actually be better for walking. So it's ergonomically designed, it's better for your spine. It's actually a product that makes the process of living more sustainably better and easier. And I think there's a really interesting lesson there in products which aren't just sustainable because of their supply chain, the way they get manufactured and distributed, but actually in their very conception and their very use encourage a more sustainable form of behaviour. One of the things we looked at with Green Thing was music, and we thought, why is there all this sort of soundtrack to driving, but there's no soundtrack to walking? So we got together with a bunch of musicians, and we got them to, in fact, there should at this point be strategically a piece of music playing. Okay. A bunch of musicians, and we got them to all write songs for walking, so bits of music which are soundtracks to walking. And we make them available to download as a podcast and put in your MP3 player, and just have a different perspective on life when you walk around. And it's the world's first walkcast, as we call it. And the other thing we did in terms of adventure and fulfillment and freedom, we made this short film which was designed to show that actually going for a walk can probably be the most adventurous, life-changing thing you can possibly do. In recognition of the fact there are sixth form audiences, I would say it's a 15 certificate, but that should be okay.
You know, said the man, rather than drive today, I'm gonna walk. And so he walked. And as he walked, he saw things, strange and wonderful things he would not otherwise have seen. A deer with an itchy leg, a flying motorcycle, a father and daughter separated from a bicycle by a mysterious wall. And then he stopped. Walking in front of him was her, the woman who as a child had skipped with him through fields and broken his heart. Sure, she'd aged a little. In fact, she'd aged a lot, but he felt all his old passion for her return. Ford, he called softly, for that was her name. Don't say another word, Gusty, she said, for that was his name. I know a tent next to a caravan exactly 300 yards from here. Let's go there and make love. In the tent, Ford undressed. She spread one leg and then the other. Gusty entered her boldly and made love to her rhythmically while she filmed him because she was a keen amateur pornographer. The earth moved for both of them, and they lived together happily ever after, and all because he decided to walk that day.
So it's one sort of illustration about how it might apply to transportation. I'm just going to end by talking about sort of products. It's something that's been touched on already, but I think we badly need a combination of two things: new sustainable products and services and design systems, but we need that in tandem with a way to present those and to frame those as being smart, sexy, fashionable, fun, things that are worthwhile on their own terms, not just as alternatives to existing services that are in the market. I think just a couple of examples there of this, of things that I think are really useful reference points. The play pump is a delightful invention. In Africa, it's a children's merry-go-round that's attached to a water pump and storage tank. And it provides essential clean drinking water to children and families in rural Africa. And as the children play, water gets pumped from deep underground, and effectively it solves a serious environmental problem effortlessly with imagination and delight. I think it's a rather lovely example of where you can harness creativity and fun and play and actually also solve a serious problem at the same time. Something we've promoted recently on Green Thing is a fabulous invention by some product design students. Is a substance called Sugru, which is a new kind of silicon molding material which it basically hardens at room temperature like rubber and allows you to kind of hack or fix anything. So anything gets broken in your house, you can actually mend it. It's kind of like blue tack on steroids, and it can actually, you know, fix things. It can go into the dishwasher. It's waterproof. It took unbelievable amount of R&D investment to make. Something we've prototyped this year in concept phase at Green Thing is a biodegradable tent. There's something like 450 music festivals a year in this country, and tents that people buy and then dispose on site is a big problem. And we prototyped a biodegradable tent that was based on an origami design with the British Origami Society, and after 3 days at the festival, it degrades and it has seeds in the material so that flowers grow where you've been. And it's just an interesting idea about how to explore different ways to attack a problem. The other part that I mentioned is it's very important to understand, as something we talk about in Green Thing a lot. It's not just about invention, it's about adoption. So there's, I think, a problem at the moment in society where technology is seen as a silver bullet. Simply by inventing things, we can actually change our situation, and perhaps we'll talk about that more later. But the adoption is incredibly important. We need to use creative skills to make what we already have easier and cheaper to use, to make our innovations desirable and human-friendly. We mentioned P&G before and Unilever. I think Procter & Gamble probably come up with many inventions that are scientifically interesting, such as being able to wash at lower temperature. But actually it took a creative campaign to get that adopted so that 1 million people and eventually washed at 30 degrees instead of 40 and saved a huge amount of energy in the process. Bicycles in cities are nothing new. It was probably the Paris Vélib system which was the benchmark for this, and clearly been successfully copied by London. But really by designing it in a certain way and making it an incredibly important design system of use as well, rather than simply the idea of having it. And of course, it's helped by such things as Copenhagen Cycle Chic, which is a blog we like in Denmark, where it's basically loads of fabulously cool and impossibly beautiful-looking Danish people on bikes and pictures of them. And it does a very important thing. It signals that everybody else is doing it, and it creates this idea of desirability and social norms. A company, O-Power, in the States uses behavioral psychology to actually compare your energy use with your neighbors and use very, very subtle prompts on your bills, such as smiley emoticons to signal when you've done well and when you haven't done so well, and using that power of social norming and psychology to influence energy use. And it's used by about 19 energy utilities. Since we're on the subject of smiley faces and energy use, I couldn't resist just slipping this in, which I think is a lovely piece of design, and it's a way to get you to switch off the light by simply making it a smiley face when you turn it off. I think the last thing I was just going to end on was something we did at Green Thing recently, which is seasonably appropriate. We noticed this terrible tragedy of lost single gloves around the capital, that wherever you see people tend to leave them out for display because everyone knows in their heart that a single glove is a terrible thing and it should be reunited with its partner. So we thought, what would happen if you gathered single gloves? People sent them in, London Transport, museums, bus companies send us their lost property. We match them, pair them, repair them, sew labels into them so that they're left and right and they're clearly identified, and sell them as newly sustainable pairs of glove-loved gloves. And it's I think, a lovely story about waste and reuse. And it's also, I think, a very deeply systemically sustainable design system, and perhaps there's some lessons there. The last point I was just going to make was something that I think Hilary Benn touched on, which is, in the end, we do need a positive vision of a sustainable future. The world badly needs this. It's something that tells people this isn't a life with less, it's a life with more. And in fact, I think that's one of the things that creativity can show it. A life with more creativity, more contentment, more health, happiness, community, society, and that ultimately a sustainable way to live is a kinder, smarter, friendlier, and actually better way to be. Thank you.
Andrew, just before we throw it open to the floor, you talk about, creativity for positive change, but actually that's against this huge sort of a panorama of companies that are still trying to get you, with all their advertising, all their techniques, to get you to buy as much as possible.
Yeah.
So what is the role of companies and the advertising industry and the creative industry to actually start, this is great, but actually a lot of people won't even seen this yet, but they will see those adverts on the tea every night, they will see the adverts in the newspapers, etc., etc. So how do you start to change that balance of power?
Well, yeah, I agree. It's very frustrating, I think, that, we and other people like us don't necessarily have the resources, at our disposal to compete. I think it's all, I suppose my point about creativity is it's not a thing on its own, but it's actually a very, very critical ingredient in the mix. And I think there's a lot of discussion about politics and policy, about technology, but ultimately I think there have been times in history where creativity has been the thing that's catalyzed social movement and change. And I think this is such a time, but actually if you look at all of the energy and the resources that's put into solving this problem, I think very little goes towards behaviour change and about creativity to be part of that solution. And I would perhaps argue that one of the sensible ways to allocate resources would be to put more resources, not just towards the invention and deployment of technologies, but towards the adoption of them. And I think that that's not something that's within our control to, we can't control it, but we can try and influence and lobby for it.